Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Truthful Ministry podcast. We did miss a week. It was just, holidays, New Year. Also, where we're at, we got an insane amount of snow, and so just the commutes and stuff just didn't really make a lot of sense. But we are back. We're excited. We want to keep things going. This might end up being the longest streak of continuous episodes, other than the fact we missed 1 week.
Yeah.
In the past, all the seasons have been kind of broken up, and I'd have a few people that were able to make it as guests, and then there wouldn't be anybody for a while, so this will be good.
We're professionals now. So.
Yeah, we figured it out. We've got the system. Cody being a partner now has been really helpful. We also, for today, if you look at the title of the video, we are going to be talking about marriage and singleness and things like that, and just what that's like, because Cody's obviously married and has a child now. Me, your boy, still called to singleness right now, and that's fine. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why it's fine, and we're going to talk about what Cody's life's been like, being married, and just the differences, things around that topic. And we're doing it a little bit differently today. In the past, Cody and I have kind of prepared a little bit more of a structure and really thought out our different points and what we're going to say. But just this last Sunday, so a couple days ago at the time of us recording, Cody and I had another one of our just random, hour-long theological random discussions.
Right.
And we do that pretty frequently. And I was just man, this is what I want the podcast to be. I was I wish I could go back in time and I've put a camera up there and you're in that room and just uploaded that, because it was such a banger conversation. And so we were just talking about, well, why don't we just do that? Why don't we come up with a topic, come up with an idea, and maybe ahead of time, we both have a couple notes on things we could bring up or questions. But what if we just go and just see what happens? Yeah. So be a little more freeform today. We're trying it out. If it ends up being horrible, you let us know.
Yeah.
So.
If you like the more structured episode or the less structured episode, let us know down in the comments.
Yeah, let us know. For real though. Do you want to talk about what your idea of marriage versus single, or kind of what the premise of the podcast was going to be in your eyes, and we can just kind of start going from there?
Yeah, I'm hoping to be able to crank out a few episodes with this.
Right.
Johnny is skeptical of my ability, but he doesn't know how much I can talk about this topic. Literally, for youth, every single February, the month of February is marriage, dating, and sex month.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of stuff teenagers hear about it all the time, so I spend a month. I get 4 messages out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't even really spend a whole lot of time talking about singleness with that. I spend a lot of time talking about marriage and dating. I can get a lot. There's a lot that I don't say because they're teenagers, and But I was thinking for this, just kind of talking about just generally what is marriage, biblically speaking, how should Christians view marriage versus how does the world tend to view marriage? Is it something that we should desire, or is it something that, is just a thing that happens?
Just happens.
Yeah. I kind of want to talk about some of the best marriage advice I've gotten, so I can share that and tell, has this actually been helpful, that kind of stuff. And then with singleness, just kind of similar stuff. What does the Bible say about singleness? Is singleness something to be desired? Is it something to be pursued? And I think that's, an actual question, because different traditions in the faith and different circumstances would answer those questions differently.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth talking about. Is singleness something to celebrate? Is it something to be ashamed of? Is it something that's just you just are, you don't, it's just a thing, don't think too much about it? Those are also, I think, topics that come up a lot around this conversation. I think are worth speaking into.
What if we started by, just for people who don't know, one of the reasons we feel able to talk about this stuff is because you are married.
Right.
You've been married for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
You just had your first child back in, it's almost coming up on a year.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little about that just to start, and your background? And so tell me about, when y'all met, and then also when was the moment where you were I really need to start thinking about marriage versus this is just some cute girl that I met and it's fun.
That's good. So basically, to not talk too much about, there's a lot of details I give, but in 2017, let's see, I would have been 2 years out of high school at that point. So I was like 19, coming on 20 that September. My birthday's in September. If you, as a viewer, just want to send me gifts or something. But I had an internship at a church that summer, and Courtney went there. And so we met at the church. And, you know, I'd committed to not pursuing anything romantic or whatever over that summer. I wasn't looking for it. And then as soon as I wasn't looking, that's when God brought the perfect woman. And so, I mean, at the end of that summer, I went on a mission trip. And then when I got back, you know, it was within a couple of weeks that, you know, I was like, I gotta lock that down. So we went and took care of that. I lived at that time about 2.5 hours away from her, because I had driven to the town for the internship. And so for the first almost year that we were together, it was like I was driving every weekend back and forth with like no money and like a broken down car. And there's just a lot of stuff during our dating season, especially that first year, where it was just very clear, like, you know, God's hand was on it. If God didn't want us to be together, we wouldn't have been, because he provided the way to make it possible in many ways. But I guess as far as when did I first start really thinking about marriage seriously? Because, and I'll talk about this, like my conviction about dating and marriage is like, that's the purpose of dating, is to find someone to marry. So like, it wasn't like I didn't think about it at all, but I would say it was definitely, if we started dating in August of 2017, it was by like January that I was like, all right, if we're gonna keep doing this, like, we need to start talking about marriage more seriously. And so I'm kind of, you know, I'm not a subtle guy. I'm a all in or nothing with this kind of stuff. And you know, fortunately my wife is also someone that's like that. She doesn't like, we don't like to take half measures when it comes to these things. And so like, I went on another mission trip in January, and when I got back, we got together and I was like, we need to start thinking about this. And we're like, started like listening to like sermons together on it, and like reading books, and like studying what does the Bible say about marriage, and just really getting our minds around it. And that's when I started looking into, like, I still lived with my mom at the time, and so I was like, well, if I'm gonna get married, I should probably, I felt a conviction that I needed to prove to her parents, I needed to prove to her, and I needed to prove to myself that I can live on my own and support myself and support her. And so, like that summer, so it was 2018, I moved out to where she was and got a job and got an apartment, and did that for about a year. And that's, after a year, I felt like, okay, I think I've proven it enough. We got engaged, and then set our wedding date for summer. It was July of 2020. So, you know, we set that the year before, and we were super excited. And then a plague hit.
Not what you were expecting.
No, but again, God's hand was on it, because like there was this weird, like, it was like a 3-week band there during the plague, where the government was like, things are starting to get a little bit better. We can kind of relax a little bit of our gathering rules. You can have a gathering of up to 50 people. And it was right, like our wedding date landed right in the middle of that. And so we were able to have, it was a small wedding. We didn't get to invite everybody that we were hoping to, but we were able to get like the, you know, essentials at least were there, family and like close friends. And then it was literally like 2 weeks after that things started climbing down again. But we were able to get our honeymoon in, and the ceremony in and everything, and it was cool. It was good. But that's kind of the journey of how we met and got married, and so that's been, gosh, 4.5 years now. Coming up on 5 years this summer. So we're gonna do something exciting for that. We'll see.
Well, I don't know if you had anything else like super pressing on the front of your mind, but I wanted to get into like right into like what's been like the biggest, I don't know, adjustment or biggest thing that like you didn't expect in being married. because to a degree, it's like, all right, well, we're gonna start living together, but you can go to like premarital counseling, and you can like read a book, but at the end of the day, like you get married, and like I don't know, a few months in, what was some of the first stuff that hit you of like, man, like I'm married now and I have to deal with this? What was the first big kind of adjustment you realized?
I think, to be perfectly honest, the biggest surprise about marriage to me was that it was a lot easier than I expected it to be. Like, I feel like, you hear people talk about, like, once you get married, you're living with the person, you're butting heads. And so, like, you kind of go in a little bit, like, braced of, like, all right, we're going to have a lot of, like, we're going to have to kind of fight out our differences of, like, lifestyle and stuff. Because that's where that comes from is, you get used to living two different kinds of, like, just normal day-to-day stuff. Like, where do you put the pots and pans in the kitchen? Which way is the toilet paper supposed to go in the bed? Like, you have those kinds of things that, like, it never comes up until after you're married. For the most part, Courtney and I were pretty on board there. It helped that Courtney hadn't really lived on her own much other than, like, in college. And so she hadn't, like, established a lot of that stuff, and I hadn't really either. I mean, I'd lived on my own for a couple of years, but I wasn't super set in my ways about stuff. So it was really easy for us to just kind of mesh our lives together. And a lot of that, I think, is also just having humility in the relationship to say, like, this stuff's not that big a deal. It's not worth fighting over. But, I mean, really, I feel like that's one of the things you hear a lot is, like, be prepared to have fights. And, like, our marriage counseling, he did it was my youth pastor who did our marriage counseling. He was also Courtney's youth pastor.
You've told me about this briefly before.
And during the marriage counseling, the way he did it is he does the 5 F's.
Yep.
He does there are 5 things that have the potential to cause problems in your marriage, and it was like family, finances, friends.
I can never remember the fourth one.
I can't either. But then the other one is fun.
Yeah.
Which is the most PC way of saying that with an F. But stuff that can cause problems in your marriage. But fighting was like one of the things that he talked about. He's like, you're gonna fight. Here's how you fight. Here's how you handle it. And it's like, Courtney, I don't really fight that much. Which isn't to say that, like, we're better because we don't fight. Different marriages are different. But all that to say, as far as what I was expecting and, like, caught me off guard, I was prepared to, like, man, Courtney and I have never really fought before, but now we're getting married. Like, that's going to be tough. Like, that's going to suck. I don't want to have to fight with her. And so, it doesn't really come up that much.
Historically, from my point of view, like, most of the time when I hear people talking about marriage, like, I do hear those people saying those things of, like, oh, I'll be ready to fight. Like, y'all might, you don't even know, man. Like, after about a year, that old ball and chain, like, it's going to be annoying. But honestly, and maybe I'm crazy for saying this, like, I feel like most of the time when I hear that stuff, it's from people who are more secular. Right. I feel like
that's true.
The people in my life that I've seen that, like, I really look up to and respect, and I look at their marriages, most of them usually say the same thing that you're saying, where they're like, we just really don't, like, bicker them. Like, we don't really have, like, yeah, like, we'll have some minor disagreements or, like, whatever, but, like, they're like, we've never, like, had big fights, stuff like that. Like, I've been hearing that for a long time, and I look at the people that have said that stuff to me, and I'm always like, these are, like, people that I really believe are Christians and, like, actually following Jesus. Yeah. And then I hear people that are saying the other side of, like, oh, you're all going to bicker and all that stuff, and to be honest, usually it's not. And I think I heard this great quote from Louis Giglio. I don't remember his exact words, but he was on Sadie Robertson's podcast, and he was talking about marriage and just the importance of, like, the decision making. And because Sadie had asked him, like, how he had met his wife, and he said that sometimes he does marriage counseling for people who have, like, already been married and they're, like, arguing things like that. Yeah. And he said, I'll never forget it because it was so real in the moment. He just straight up said, like, sometimes people get to talking to me and they'll start discussing, like, why they're having issues and things like that, and he'll straight up think, like, why did y'all get married in the first place? Yeah. He's like, I'm never going to say that because, like, we should try and figure this out and, like, stuff like that, but sometimes he's just like, man, like, why would y'all have done this? Like, how did you not land on the same page first? Or how did you not, you know what I mean? And he started talking about like the basis of like, what is marriage? Like biblically, what are you supposed to be doing here? And then he straight up said like, if you're getting married for any reason other than looking at the other person and thinking like, I think we could better build the kingdom together, then like, why are you getting married? And it was so cool the way he said it, because I was just like, man, that's so real to hear someone just flat out say, like, sometimes I look at people and think, why'd you get married?
Right.
And he was like, you look at, you know, divorce rates and stuff in the country, and you look at how many people say stuff like that, like, oh, y'all are going to bicker in marriage, and y'all are going to fight so much and have all these issues and stuff like that. And it's just like, what have we maybe strayed away from in the last 100 years or so?
Yeah. I really do think that a big part of that is just, rather than letting the Bible define for us what it means to be married, what it means to be a husband and a wife, like what are those roles, we let society, even in the church has really let society kind of infiltrate. It's sad. I mean, you look at divorce rates between non-religious people and evangelicals in the country, and there's not much difference statistically, which says a lot about where we are as a church as far as marriage goes. But I really do think that like, if you approach marriage from a perspective of, we get to define what this is for ourselves, and rather than letting God tell you what your roles are in the marriage, that's what causes a lot of problems. Because what you end up doing is, you know, if you're working out what is essentially a social contract between you and another person, and you feel restrained by it, and you feel like this is making my life a little bit more difficult, and there's going to be seasons where that happens, where like you're going to run into difficulties that you didn't experience when you were single, and you're having them because you're married, and maybe perhaps because of the role that you are playing in marriage. When you have those, if the person that defined the role is your spouse, then your frustrations over the role go to your spouse. But if the person that defines the role for you is God, then you can take that to God.
Right.
And, you know, if you have a appropriate theology and a healthy faith, then you can do that and take your frustrations to him. But at the end of the day, also recognize, like, I mean, God's smarter than me. So if he says this is how it's supposed to be, then I can trust that it'll work out the way that it should. And in my experience, that's always been true. The moments where I felt frustrated, you know, I can fall back on, like, this is difficult right now, but I'm going to keep pushing through with this and trust that God has blessing in store. Like, he didn't just plan it this way just to mess with me. And it always ends up being a blessing, and I don't regret doing that.
So, I think, too, the same way you're talking about, like, taking it to God versus, like, being upset with your spouse. I think even from the jump, some people, like today, don't give a thought to who the person is. Because everybody talks about, like, the one or something like that.
Right.
And sometimes people just kind of, like, they're like, oh, this person's hot, and we get along, and, like, they're nice, and, like, you know, they brought me flowers that one time, like, we get along well, and stuff like that. You date for, like, a year, and you're like, okay, cool, and this is it. And it's just like, I mean, maybe that person's great, and that's awesome, but, like, have you spent the time in prayer being like, God, is this it? Because, like, I don't want something that's good. I don't want something that's pretty good or decent. Like, whatever you have for me is ultimately going to be better. And so it brings in that other level of trust of, like, well, is this the person that, like, you know, we got along really well in college, and so we got married, like, right out of college because we got along. But now 5 years later, things are different, and I just don't know. Like, man, like, we're just so different. Like, man, they've been doing this job, and I've been doing this, and there's tension. Versus just thinking, like, God, this was the person that I know you told me to be with. Like, I know this is the person, God. I know that you wanted us to get married. And so, again, it's taking it to God versus having those, like, doubts into your mind of, like, well, was this even the right thing? Like, I don't know. Like, should I go somewhere else? It's like, God, you told me to do this. I have confidence in what you said and your promise. Just from the beginning, like, how did you even choose this person? So I guess
I think with that too, another bit that's important, like from a mindset kind of point of view with what you're talking about, is like when it comes to marriage, acknowledging, for me, this is the way that I have to think about it. As I think this is the way the Bible talks about it. But like, I'm not just like a slave to my emotions. Like, I didn't marry her because like, well, I fell in love like it was an accident. Like, that's the language we use. We use like, it just happened, and so I guess I got to do, the heart wants what the heart wants, and so I got to follow it, kind of thing. If that's what's in the front, if your emotional feeling, the way that your spouse makes you feel, is the central like thing that binds you together, those emotions are fleeting, and there's going to be moments where like it's not fun, right?
I think you were the person who mentioned to me one time that it was you said it was similar to like how pagans thought about like emotion and things like that, because they thought, oh, Cupid shot me with an arrow. That's why I just happened to fall in love with this person. What am I going to do?
Yeah, that's where I think that's where that stuff comes from. Like, philosophically, as a culture, we're still very influenced by like Greek and like Greco-Roman culture and philosophy and stuff. And those ways of thinking about love and marriage, of just like this, like it happens to you. You have no control over it. I think it's crap. First of all, it's an excuse. I think it's an excuse that people use to like do things when it comes to relationships that they know they're not supposed to.
Right.
It's like, well, I couldn't help it. It just happened. It's like,
and we almost glorify it now to the sense like in movies and things like that when we talk about like relationships being just so passionate. Like, you just see these movies where two people that are like supposed to be the love interests are just like not compatible, like almost like Romeo and Juliet, where it's like logically, as great as y'all feel about each other, this should not make any sense. But it's like, but when we are together, we're just so passionate. And it's so exciting. It feels so right. Yeah, exactly. It just feels so good. Like the way it makes me, I can't help how I feel, and it's like you can't help it. You can. You can tell yourself to stop thinking about this person. You can separate yourself from the situation. Yeah. You can do all these things.
You can acknowledge that like this person is not someone that like you at one level are allowed to marry. Like, if you're a Christian and you're thinking about someone who's not a Christian, working with teenagers, that's one that comes up a lot. Right. Is like, I think we talked about this before, of just like the, the teenage girl that's like, I found a boy and he's a Christian. It's like, how do you know that? It's like, well, he goes to this church. It's like, great. Yeah. Kind of what I was saying before, that like with the emotion stuff, if you're leading with that, just in general in life, this is good, just life advice. You should not let your emotions lead you. But also, to kind of comment on what you're saying about like the passion and stuff, it's like, it's not supposed to be devoid of emotion either. Obviously, you don't want to marry someone that like, the way it was put to me one time, by I think it was my youth pastor who said this when I was in youth. He's like, you don't want to marry someone that like you're gonna roll over in the morning, like in bed every morning and be like grossed out by them.
Right.
It's like, you want to be attracted to them, you want to be excited to be married to them, that kind of stuff. But the will is the most important thing. Like, for us, like, we're supposed to be a people that make decisions with self-control, with our mind and not with our heart. So we make decisions and act upon our will, and our emotions counsel our will. So like, there's lots of people that, according to like standards, you could marry lots of different people. You only want to marry one person. And so that's kind of where the emotion comes in. But that doesn't change once you get married. And that's where I think a lot of people screw up, is like, well, I married that person and you're just not that person anymore. And it's like, did you expect them to be the same person for 20 years? Like, people change. I'm different today than I was 2 years ago. Like, a lot different than I was 2 years ago. Versus, like, the person I was when Courtney and I first met. I'm super different. I still live... Yeah. Like, and that's a good thing. Yeah. And Courtney's very different. I mean, heck, she'd been a Christian for, like, a year at that point. Barely. And so, like, the person that she is now, if she was the same person, that would be a bad thing. Yeah. So, like, going into marriage and knowing and expecting, like, we're going to change. And so, like, what is the reason that I'm staying married to this person? If the reason is anything other than I vowed to, then you're wrong. That's not what the Bible tells us. It's, I made an oath to her and I made an oath to God that I'm going to be committed to her for the rest of my life. And that's the thing that drives me. It's not, I'm doing all the stuff that I'm supposed to be doing as long as you're doing what you're doing, right? I'll give what I give as long as you give what you give. You'll hear that one a lot, the 50-50, you got to give 50-50. And I get what they mean by that. You got to carry your load kind of thing. But the best marriage advice I got before I got married was from this older couple at our church that I was close with. They've been married for ever. And the guy pulled me aside one day and he's like, "Oh, no, Cody." It was this older, kind of gravelly guy. They tell you 50-50, but really it's 100% no matter what.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me of just whatever she's giving, I'm not going into it expecting her or counting on her to give anything, right? I didn't marry her so that she could do things for me. What the marriage was I'm committing to love her as well as I can. And that's my commitment to her and God. And so I'm going to do that regardless of the circumstances. And what I've found is that if both people have that mindset, that's way better than 50-50. Because you got two people giving 100% most of the time. There's going to be times where you're not. But if I'm just being a butt for a week or something, I'm just in a rut, and my wife has two choices for how to respond to that. She can lash out at me and get angry with me and put it in my face, but she doesn't typically do that. What she usually does is just keeps loving me well, and then it typically resolves itself because it's you can't be a jerk forever to someone that's just loving you good. Especially if you're a Christian, the Holy Spirit's gonna the Holy Spirit's the one that's gonna put it in your face.
Right.
And so just trusting God to take care of the problems.
I'm curious. I don't remember. Did you do your own custom vows, or did you kind of do some default ones?
I'm not. This might be my hot take. I don't like custom vows.
I feel like it's going around. So I've now performed 2 weddings.
Yeah.
Always the officiate, never the groom. That's what I always say. I'm gonna do a third now coming in May, so in a few months. And they both kind of felt the same way. They were custom vows. It just feels I don't know, it's a lot. And then there's pressure on both of us to write banger vows. If one person writes more or something like that.
Yeah. I feel like they can be kind of awkward sometimes.
Yeah.
You're in the audience and you're just people don't most of the time they're not actually vows. That gets on my nerves.
Yeah.
We wrote our own vows and there's no promises. They're just this
really
is why I
you.
love you.
Yeah.
And it's okay, that's great, but
also it's just a lot of pressure, a lot to remember. Both times the groom both looked at me and were just kind of dude, I don't want to have to remember a bunch of stuff. I don't want to have to read a bunch of stuff because it's I'm nervous on my wedding day. I just want to be looking at her. I don't have to pull out a piece of paper. So we just did kind of basic default repeat after me's.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you usually say, you say in sickness and in health, and then you also say to have you and to hold you. And I talked with both of them about what that meant, of what it means to have you or to hold you. It's what does that mean? It's to have you is you are mine in a way. So yes, in a weird way you could try and say it is I'm in charge. But what it really means is I'm declaring myself I want to be responsible for making sure that you're okay. But then the other person says it too. So it's we are both committing to being I am responsible for Cody now. He's responsible for me. We're lifting each other up. This is a 2-way road. It's not just we kind of enjoy hanging out, and I'm gonna try and treat you well.
Yeah,
bro.
we're roommates that get to do it with perks.
Roommates with benefits. Yeah.
And that's the way a lot of people think about marriage.
Yeah.
Honestly, is you're functionally just roommates that sleep in the same bed together. Maybe sometimes there's lots of people that don't, but another benefit of the pre-written vows, the kind of traditional vows, is that again that kind of idea of marriage is whatever I define it to be. And so, like, I'm not gonna let anybody tell me what my vows are. Like, I'm gonna write my own vows. Like, even just bringing that mindset to it, to me, just feels, it just doesn't feel right. And having, like, these are traditional vows that people have sworn to each other for, I mean, not forever. Like, obviously, they came from somewhere. But for well over 100 years. Like, odds are, if your parents are married, your parents swore according to these vows, and your grandparents swore according to these vows, and the people in your church swore according to these vows. And there's something about that adds that layer of accountability of, like, you know, we're all talking about marriage in the same way and under the same terms. That just adds to the health, the potential health of your relationship. That I think is important. If you want to do, like, this is typically what I tell people. Like, if you want to do that, like, you can basically do that, just don't put it in the ceremony. Like,
yeah, I agree.
Like, Courtney and I, we like did the thing where we wrote to each other before.
Yeah, I was gonna say my friend Evan did that.
Yeah.
They still did default vows, but like before the wedding, before like she walked down the aisle and stuff, like he was in the groomsman room and she was in the bridal whatever, and like they both like opened each other's letters and it was cute, and it was like kind of like vows where it was like, I love you so much, I promise to all, you know, that kind of cheesy thing, but it was like, and in the wedding we said the actual vows. Right. That's a great compromise. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, because to me, like, the ceremony this is the tradition, like the ceremony stuff, and I'm a pretty pro-tradition kind of guy, as long as they're good traditions. But, like, I really do think so. Like, the ceremony is, like, do it the way it's supposed to be done and the way that it's expected to be done. And then, like, you know, you got a reception and a honeymoon and all, like, you've got the rest of your life to figure out the, like, customizing it to you the way you want it. Let this be something that, like, you know, is solid and time tested. Because you don't want to, like, be 30 years later showing your kids, like, the video of your wedding and be like, yeah, we did this thing that was really trendy then.
Yeah.
And it's, like, really dumb and embarrassing now. And, like, I wish that we had done it differently.
Right.
And it's like, there's going to be details when you get married that, like, you're going to be like, I wish I'd done that differently. But you want that to be, like, not the ceremony stuff. You know, you want that to be solid. You don't want to be like, ooh, we really did that weird. That's one of the things we could talk about is the actual wedding. That's one that I don't hear people talk enough about. Courtney and I mean, we didn't have, like, a wedding planner or anything. We planned it. Courtney planned it. I was there. But there's a lot of stuff that you don't think about, as, like, you got to figure this out. And there's going to be stuff that, like, goes wrong. And I remember, like, my wife can get pretty anxious. And leading up to it, she was far more anxious than I was. Day of was the day that I got stressed, was, like, getting things worked out. But, like, the lead up, and I would tell her all the time, I was like, look, as long as we're married at the end, I don't really care what happens.
Yeah.
But stuff's going to go wrong, like, 5 minutes before, or not 5, like 15 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, nobody could find our rings. Like, nobody knew where the rings were. And, like, that was stressing me out, and I was getting mad. We found out the photographer had them because she was taking pictures. And, like, I knew that, but, like, we just forgotten in the hustle of it. And, like, that morning, golly, pick your venues well when you get married. We did this, like, outdoor wedding at, like, I can't remember what you call it, but it was at a place. And the guy that ran the venue was just not super great to work with. And, like, the day before we were supposed to set up, and he hadn't had any marriages, like, nothing had happened all year because of COVID. It's like there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
We were the first wedding of the year. The day before the day, we were getting there trying to set stuff up, that was the day he's like, we're going to install these giant industrial fans all over the place. And he was just like, acting like he was doing us this big favor of like, this is gonna help keep y'all cool. It's like, great, you could have done this like a week ago.
Yeah.
Like, did you have to do this today? So we're gonna work around him. And then the day of, we get there, and he had mowed the land where we were gonna like do the ceremony, but he didn't clean up like the grass clippings.
Oh yeah, as soon as you said it.
And so there's just like grass clippings all over the place.
Dude.
And it's like, bro. And then we had to clean it up. Like, he didn't clean it up. So there's going to be stuff like that.
Yeah, I'll say in the weddings that I've experienced, my sister's wedding, I wasn't the officiate, but I was like front row. And they did a really, really small wedding too. It was literally like in her backyard because they live on like a big farm property. And she like looks over at like my mom and my dad and me and is like, forgot the rings. Like the ceremony has started. And so my mom has a picture of me on her phone where I was like the designated, like, hey, you play soccer and stuff, right? Like, you have to run across the property back to the house. She said it's in the bathroom somewhere. And so I literally, like, in the middle of the ceremony was like, all right. I like politely walked to the back, and then as soon as I got out, like, onto the yard, I was like full running, like, back to the house and stuff, and had to go grab the rings and like politely like walk up and be like, you know, in the middle of the ceremony. And then in the first wedding I performed, it was really windy outside, and they wanted to do the cheesy candle thing where like the wife's mom lights a candle, and then the groom's mom lights a candle, and then they come up and they light the candles together. And so it's so windy, and they're literally sitting there like trying to get the candles lit forever.
Yeah, if you're gonna do an outdoor wedding, I would just suggest, if anybody asks me, I'm like, there's a million different versions of that. There's like the pouring the sand, or like, I one time saw like they had bought like a canvas, and like each person like had like a color of paint, and they dumped the paint on the canvas, and it was like they hung it up in their house or something, and it was like, we're mixing our colors, and and it's like, if you're gonna do it outside, just know you have zero control over the weather. Yeah. And so like, if it's windy, that's gonna get blown. Say maybe it starts raining. I've been at outdoor weddings where it started raining during the ceremony. That sucks. Yeah. I've
So my friend Evan's wedding that I mentioned earlier, his was supposed to be outside, and it started pouring down rain that day, and they had to move it inside. And then the second wedding I performed, there was some issues in this one. It was supposed to be outside, but it was raining. It wasn't even like pouring, but it was like just enough. It was like, dude, we can't do it outside. It was kind of unfortunate, but we do it inside. But here's the thing. Here's why it went wrong. And like, it was one of those things where, because the bride and the groom were my best friends in the world, I had to like be all nice about it day of and didn't make a big deal. But they fumbled the bag, and I was so mad because some of the best advice I got, like, my pastor at the time of the church I was going to made it very clear to me when I was like, hey, I have like 2 weddings coming up, because both weddings that I've done so far were both in the same month. One was at the beginning, one was at the end. So I was prepping for 2 weddings at the same time. And some of the best advice he gave me straight up was like, he made sure that I understood like what I was doing in terms of like, you're the religious person. Like, marriage is a biblical thing. You're like in charge. Like, this is a religious ceremony. Yeah. So like, when you walk in there, like, just know like, you're important. Like, you have the authority here.
You're kind of in charge.
Yeah. And he straight up said like, he's like, every time I've done a wedding, and I took this from him. He was like, every time I've done a wedding, he was like, I run the rehearsal. It's a religious ceremony. I'm in charge. Like, I don't care about the flowers. I don't care about the whatever. Like, all that stuff's fine. But like, I'm telling you where to go. I'm telling you like the bride gets to pick like some other stuff, you know, obviously. But like, I'm telling you when the rings go on. I'm reading this. Yeah. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's most helpful for you since you're in charge of the religious portion of the ceremony. And it's also like the whole ceremony, like all the people getting there and the invitations, all that stuff, like whatever. But like, everybody's there for the 10-minute, 15-minute ceremony. That is the highlight of the show, and it's the religious part. So he was just like, you're in charge, do it. Cool. The first wedding I did, I showed up to the rehearsal, and I'd kind of spoken to the bride and the groom about it beforehand, but the wedding planner got there, and I was like, hey, just to let you know, like, I got it. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, tonight, like, I'm in charge. And she was just like, all right, cool. And then I ran the rehearsal. I was like, all right, so everybody's going to come in this way. We're going to do it one more time. Like, I did the whole thing. Wedding day comes, perfect, smooth, no issues. Second wedding I go to do, I show up expecting in my mind, because they're my best friends, like, I thought I had this conversation with them, that, like, I'm going to be running the rehearsal. I literally showed up, like, ready to go. And they were like, oh, Aunt Jenny's going to be here. She's done all of our cousins' weddings, like, our family's weddings, whatever. And I was just like, I mean, okay. And so she does it, and it was not great. Wedding day comes, and, like, they made it look like it was, like, my fault but it was something we had never rehearsed. I was told that at some point, like, these children were gonna like read scripture,
Right.
but we never rehearsed that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how am I supposed to know? So the bride and the groom come up there, and again, we had never rehearsed. They wanted me. Now I'm getting a little petty. They wanted me, like, I just think this is weird. They wanted me to like tell everyone like they could be to stand up and to sit down, but I didn't do that at the first wedding because in my mind I'm like, you go to a wedding, and all of a sudden the music starts and the back door's open. It's like it's just common knowledge, like stand up. And even if it's not common knowledge, I bet it would be for about half the room. When half the room stands up, the other half's gonna follow.
Yeah.
And then like everybody's gonna sit down just like when the wedding starts. So we never practiced any of that. Everybody stands up, and then they wanted me to tell people to sit down, but like we never rehearsed it, and so I just never did. So like I started my speech, and I look over at Matt, one of the groomsmen, and he was straight up like, and I was like, oh yeah, everybody can be seated. Like we're all just gonna stand the whole time. And so I made a joke out of it. It's fine. But when Carson even first got up, I remembered that.
That's rough.
I remembered that they wanted scripture to be read at the beginning, but again, we never rehearsed it. And so he gets up there, and I'm looking at him, and I was like, I'm looking over at the kids. They're up there, and I was like, I did this, and he's like, and I was like, are they gonna start reading? And he's just like, I was like, so we're gathered. Like I just started going.
Yeah.
And at the end, they were like, you forgot to let the kids read scripture. And I was like, what do you mean I forgot? I was like, I remembered.
That's not on me.
They're like, you were supposed to announce that they were going to read scripture. I was like, that literally isn't in my book.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have anything prepared to be like, no, children read scripture. Like, we didn't do that.
Yeah, so, I think that's definitely, if you're a listener and you're performing a wedding, you're, someone that should do that.
Or if you're going to be in a wedding, like trust your religious person to be in charge of the religious portion.
Yeah. The ceremony stuff, like, you got, at the very least, be on the same page, rehearse it.
Yeah.
Like, if you didn't do it in rehearsal, you're not doing it in the ceremony.
I agree.
Like, don't show up day of and be like, hey, can we do this and this and this? It's like, no.
Right.
It's like, there's a degree to which, I could be like, listen, if I don't do this, you're not getting married today.
Right.
So, like, don't throw this, make sure they know that, like, ahead of time, don't just jump them with that, but, like, I know for me, like, I've got a template. I've got a template for, the way that I do it. And I'll walk through, before I ever even get to the rehearsal, like, during the marriage counseling, with the couple, like, this is what this is going to look like. Are you cool with that? Like, this is step by step what it's going to be. Is there anything that you want differently? Because there's some stuff that's like, we can negotiate this.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff that I'm like, this is,
like I've been given like verses where like, could you read this verse? Or like, I want to say that it's like, that stuff's cool, but overall, the bones, I'm in charge.
So that's one. A wedding conversation as minister to minister. What do you think about doing like a gospel presentation, a kind of like message with the ceremony? Do you do that or do you not do that?
So both times I have done a gospel presentation.
Yeah, I do.
But it's like I just keep it super short. Like I'm not preaching.
Yeah.
I usually just kind of say like, you're making a covenant to each other out of love, something like that, and you just I think both times I've used it. I think it's Romans 5:8 is the verse that I've used where it just straight up kind of says like, God loves us or something like that. I can't remember the verse at this point. I feel like I'm bad for that, but
I've got a pre-written little like 3-minute, 5-minute thing that I say that's basically like, this is what marriage is. This is what we're gathering here to do. Marriage is, a picture of God's love for us, and do a little gospel bit, and then we get into it.
Yep.
But I think that's important. That's always one of my, like, as a minister, when I go to weddings, that's one of the things I like am always really interested in is like, what's the stuff that like you can tell like this guy's like he does this every time.
Yeah.
Like I always think that stuff's interesting. But
that's just ministry in general. Like once you've been in ministry for a while, you start going to like new churches and you start looking at the pastor and stuff and thinking about like where are they going to go with this verse or what kind of story, or like when I first came to your church, there was a guest speaker, and we both afterwards you were like I think he's given that sermon before. You just start thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. To get back to talking about marriage as opposed to weddings, I think just I don't know where we're at time wise, but like a question that I think is important is, I'm just curious. I want to hear your thoughts on it before I say my thing as the married person. But as Christians, is marriage something that we should, like all Christians should pursue and desire? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Man, I don't really, I really don't think so. I think, and I'd be interested to see if your opinion is different than mine, but I just really don't think so. Just because, like, here's what I'll say: I think all Christians should be open to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't think you should be waking up every day thinking like, I need to pursue marriage to some degree.
Right.
And I think it just comes from one of the verses I'm sure you're looking for right now is like when Paul talks about the gift of singleness. And I think I just obviously look at like Jesus, and I look at Paul, who were single, and I don't think anyone. I think it'd be really weird for someone to be like, I think Paul was really disobedient for not getting married. It's like
Right.
Paul wrote the
Yeah.
scriptures. So I just think for every person it's different, and it's up to you to discern like what God's calling is for your life. Like, is there someone out there, like, are you called to be married one day? Are you called to be married later? Or is it like, all right now, like you're going to be one of the people who gets married young? Because I think there's gifts to both, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about next episode. There's benefits to both, and I think God can use anybody. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're single, married. It doesn't matter whether you've had a horrible relationship past or no relationships at all, whatever. Like, God can use anybody. So, but I do think there's a degree in which, like, you should be open to it. I've had, and we'll talk about this again more next episode probably, like, I've had some rough luck in the dating world before, and so I've definitely come out of it thinking, like, I'm going to intentionally just not date. Like,
Right.
screw marriage. You know what I mean?
Become bitter.
And I think that's a little bit too much of, like, an overswing in the opposite direction. Like, I think there's a degree in which you should be open to it, because we also do know that marriage is, like, also a gift.
Yeah.
And we hear at the very beginning, like, God tell, like, Adam and Eve, like, go and be fruitful and things like that. So I think you should be open to it. But the word pursue, like, I don't know if every Christian should actively try and pursue marriage. That's what I would probably say. And this will be where we wrap up after you give your thoughts.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think we're pretty well on the same page with that. As someone that, I love marriage. I love being married. I wish I was born married. Like, I'm a mess by myself. And I can confidently say my life is better as a result of being married than if I was single. But I think of 1 Corinthians 7, which is the singleness thing that you're talking about. But Paul specifically says, he says in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 8, to the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if you cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. And so, like, the reason he gives for getting married is, like, you can't control yourself. And so, like, what I take that to mean is, in the context of how he's talking, is like, God's brought someone into your life that you're like, I'm just like head over heels for this person. And I know that if I don't marry this person, then I'm going to be tempted to do things that I shouldn't be doing. And also, like, if you're just someone that, like, and like, you can tell, like, you're just wired for, like, man, I can't like be trusted alone. Like, I don't have self-control with these things. Like, you should, in those regards, I think, like, pursue it. But Paul goes into it, and we'll talk about this next episode, like, there's pros and cons to both. And so you shouldn't look at one as being, like, better than the other.
Right.
And, like, if you are, as a single person, saying, like, singleness is bad and pursuing marriage is what I'm supposed to do, that's sinful. In the same way, well, maybe not the same way, but in a similar manner to, like, if you're married and being like, I wish I was single, like, that's bad too. But yeah, I think just, and this is what it was for me. I was really committed. For whatever reason, God just blessed me with this. I can't take any credit for it, but he gave me, as a young guy, the wisdom to be like, if you don't want to marry that person, like, don't jump into dating, kind of thing. But, like, I really wanted to be married when I was younger. And I didn't date anybody. I didn't have a single, like, relationship until I met the woman that I'm married to. Like she was my first girlfriend, real girlfriend. You had like, when you're like a kid, like, but that doesn't count. And like, for me, that really is like, I don't want to get entangled with someone that like I don't see any future with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get entangled with someone that like I don't want to get married to, because I know like I'm gonna struggle with that. But on the flip side of that, once I found her, I was like I said, we met in August. It was January by the time like I was thinking about it. I would have been happy to be married by that summer. There were good reasons why we didn't get married that early, but like I was ready, like emotionally, like I'm ready to get married. So I think that's how, you're exactly right. The way that it should be is you've got to be open to it. If God brings the person your way, like trust that God brought this person your way, and like that's good for you. But at the same time, if God isn't bringing that person into your life, don't try to force it.
Right.
Like, I can't tell you how many people I've seen get burned and hurt over the years because they felt, and this tends to be more women than men, but men too, but like they just don't want to be single. And so they end up forcing it in a moment with someone that they shouldn't, and they end up hurt. It's like, you could have saved yourself a lot of trouble if you had just been content. So that's my closing bit of advice for marriage. If you're not satisfied completely and totally in the Lord before you get married, you're going to struggle in marriage. And just in life in general. Like your satisfaction does not come from another person. It does not come from your spouse. It's not supposed to come from them. Your satisfaction comes from the Lord. And I remember pretty vividly in my life, like about 6 months before I met Courtney, coming to a place where God brought me there of like I, in prayer, told God, I was like, if I never find someone, I'm satisfied in you. That scares me, the idea of being alone my whole life, but I know that I have you and I'm satisfied in you. And I really do truly believe God would not have allowed me to get married and to find Courtney if I hadn't come to that place first. So focus on that. Like that's what I tell people. Focus on the Lord, and all these, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you.
I was thinking that as soon as you said it.
That's I could keep going, as you know, but we'll pause it there.
That's good stuff, because that builds on a lot of like what we could talk about next episode. Like sets a good foundation for just what marriage looks like and stuff like that. So that's a good one. We'll keep it going. We'll save the rest for the next one. So hope to see you back next week. Have a good one.
Peace.